Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad Gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the mad Gasser of Mattoon. Aline Kearney was a victim of the mad Gasser. She said, "I first noticed a sickening, sweet odor in the bedroom, but at the time thought that it might be from the flowers outside the window. However, the odor grew stronger and I began to feel a paralysis of my legs and lower body." What happened? Mattoon is a small town in the state of Illinois. It had a population of about 15,800 and lies about 50 miles south of Champaign, Illinois. In 1944, most of the able-bodied men had joined the military to fight in World War II. As a result, the police force was painfully understaffed. This is when the mad Gasser of Mattoon, also known as the Phantom Anesthetist and also known as the Anesthetic Prowler, allegedly attacked. The attacks occurred over the period of about 2 weeks, beginning on August 31st, with a total of 35 victims. This strange wave of illness began with victims smelling a bad odor, but then they would fall paralyzed to the ground. The odor was described as a strangely sweet smell, with some describing it as a sweet, cheap perfume odor. Symptoms included difficulty breathing, paralysis, dry mouth, lightheadedness, burning in the throat, and a sick or ill feeling. On the night of August 31st, 1944, Urban Rafe, a sheet metal worker, said that he and his wife were attacked. He awoke at 3 a.m. and remembered feeling sick and was unable to move. He said fumes were coming in through the open window. His story was in the September 5th edition of Mattoon's Journal-Gazette, along with those of 2 children who had become violently ill after an attack. The next night, September 1st, Aline Kearney, who lived at 1408 Marshall Avenue, had a visit from her sister and nephew. The 2 women put the children to bed while Aline's husband was out working as a taxi driver. Shortly thereafter, Aline and her daughter suffered their attack. She called for her sister, who came in and opened the window, clearing the fumes from the room. Kearney's neighbor called the police, who found no sign of anyone outside of the home. However, later that night, upon Kearney's husband's return, he found someone standing near their window. He was unable to apprehend the man, but described him as tall and dressed in dark clothing with a tight-fitting hat. The next day, the story appeared on the front page of the Journal-Gazette. The headline read, "Anesthetic Prowler on Loose," and called Kearney and her daughter the first victims. The Journal-Gazette reported that the chemical used was probably chloroform or ether, or possibly both. They also reported that the Kearneys had a large sum of money in the house and that the prowler would have seen Aline counting it right before bed. That same night, 3 people in the Ryder family were attacked, as well as an unnamed woman and her children. After the attacks began, the town was on high alert. There were some sightings of men matching the prowler's description, although police believed these to just be bystanders coming to investigate the commotion, but no physical evidence was ever found until the night of September 5th. That night, Carl and Boyla Cordes returned to their home at 921 North 21st Street around 10 p.m. They saw a cloth pressed up against the screen door. Boyla took the fabric and brought it to her face, inhaling. She said that she felt as though a charge of electricity had gone through me. Then she was suddenly struck with paralysis. Her throat burned so badly that blood poured from her mouth. She was violently ill for 2 hours afterwards. Fortunately, the Gasser left behind some evidence. On the sidewalk near the front porch, police found a well-worn skeleton key and a tube of lipstick. Law enforcement found no odor on the cloth, and the key and the lipstick didn't connect to anything. After finding the evidence, local police called for help from the Illinois Department of Public Safety. On the same night Buela Cortez was attacked, so was Mrs. Leonard Burrell. There were 7 attacks the following night. On September 7th, Francis and Maxine Smith were attacked. From the 7th through the 10th, there were 6 more attacks. As the attacks continued, panic set in. The townspeople began roaming the streets with shotguns and pistols at night. Women carried bats and clubs when leaving their homes. People began sleeping with friends instead of alone. The police chief said, "Roving bands of men and boys should disband. They are in grave danger of being shot by some frightened property owner." State investigators came in to help in the search. 1 week after the news of the Gasser began to spread, the editorial staff of the Journal-Gazette criticized the local officials' handling of the case. They wrote that the police force was understaffed and that the police infighting was hindering the investigations. A September 8th editorial read, "We suppose it is natural for the pride of policeman to be stung a bit when a crime is committed. For this reason, there has been a tendency in Mattoon police circles recently to conceal from the public the fact that certain crimes have occurred." On September 11th, the Gazette reported that 2 women had been attacked. It also said that the doctor who examined both of the women said he found no evidence of poison gas and that both suffered from nervous tension. After this attack, Police Commissioner Thomas V. Wright demanded that all future victims be examined by a doctor immediately. The last report of an attack came on September 13th. A woman reported seeing the Gasser outside of her house. She described a woman dressed in man's clothing. The September 18th, 1944 Journal-Gazette described the Mad Gasser as a tall, thin man that wore a black skull cap. It continued that he moved through the night as easily and secretly as a cat, all while squirting a gas through the bedroom windows. Days after being requested, 5 squads of Illinois State Police came to Mattoon to assist in patrolling the streets. Mattoon Chief of Police C.E. Cole said the case was a mistake from the beginning to the end. He said, "We have found that large quantities of carbon tetrachloride are used in the war work done at the Alice Imperial Diesel Engine Company plant, and that has an odor which could be carried to all parts of the city as the wind shifts." The chief then quickly walked back his comments. Atlas officials said the police hadn't inspected the plant and that no factory workers had fallen ill, so it was impossible the plant was making townspeople ill. The Journal-Gazette published another story attacking the police. They wrote that there were 2 reasons the Gasser hadn't been caught. The first was that the police didn't take the case seriously enough from the beginning, and the second was that when the police finally did take it seriously, mass hysteria and outside interference combined to make their efforts unsuccessful. There were several clues found that didn't lead to anything. There was a cut window screen, open windows, and female footprints outside of some houses. The FBI investigated but came to no conclusion regarding what was happening in Mattoon. On September 12th, law enforcement announced their investigative findings. They said there were no actual attacks. The whole thing was a case of mass hysteria. They blamed Atlas for the chemical smell and said the case was fueled by the Gazette's reporting. This doesn't explain the first 5 attacks, which happened before the newspaper reported any attacks, however. The attacks stopped as suddenly as they had started. Not because the police found the Gasser, but instead because the police chief threatened to arrest anyone claiming to be a victim. Some theorized the Mad Gasser was never real. Instead, they believed this was a case of mass hysteria fueled by articles in the Gazette. They say that women who were left alone during the war experienced paranoia, panic, and delirium. Scott Maruna, a chemistry teacher and author of The Mad Gasser of Mattoon Dispelling the Hysteria, thinks that Farley Llewellyn was the Mad Gasser. Llewellyn worked at a grocery store but had a secret chemistry lab. In that lab, he experimented with chemicals, once causing an explosion that rocked the town of Mattoon. He wrote that Farley was the chemical genius behind the attacks. He said that Farley attacked people because the town wouldn't accept him. Maruna believes that the chemical Farley used was tetrachloroethane. Maruna examined 11 traits that are common in mass hysteria. For example, most cases of mass hysteria involve women, but in the case of the Mad Gasser, this makes sense because the men were away at war. Who do you think the Mad Gasser of Mattoon was? Was he or she really attacking people, or is this a case of mass hysteria? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.